The Handmaid's Tale is back for its highly anticipated fourth season, in which rebel handmaid June leads an all-out assault on the oppressive Gilead regime. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold Derby, alongside my colleague Luca Giliberti, and we're here with Emmy nominee Joseph Fiennes, who stars as Commander Waterford. Now, Joseph, I've been told that season 4 was the most revolutionary and daring that the show has done to date. And from what I've seen so far, I can safely say that people's minds will be blown and we will all need group therapy. So I'd like to know how would you describe season 4? And also, can you take us through what's Fred's mental state as we join him in season 4?
Well, I think season 4 is about freedom in many ways. It's the big escape. It's the fight back and the bite back, if you like. Finally, we get out of certain territories that we've known so well, the Waterford's house in season 1. And what I love about this season is that we get into locations. We get to really see the vastness of Gilead, and we get to see that through the eyes of the escape of June and other handmaids. So there's an expanse which I really like there, geographical expanse, and we get to meet other really interesting characters en route. But it's all about freedom. But the paradox really is in seeking freedom, especially when you've been so traumatized and brutalized by the regime, you obviously carry those scars with you. And so you might find a physical place free of Gilead, but the mental space will continue to haunt you. And I love that paradox. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And also what's fascinating and very poignant, and there's beautiful performances by so many different cast members, which are those who are in Canada, who have had to suffer patiently, knowing that their loved ones have been brutalized and traumatized, and so the repair of those relationships I'm finding really beautiful, beautiful to watch and heartbreaking. So that's really the season. I think it's about freedom, escape, and reconciliation.
And so where's Fred up to now? Because, I mean, there's so much to deal with from your character's perspective, isn't there?
Well, it's interesting because Fred hasn't really had to ponder on his crimes. I think he's always been cognizant of his evil doings, but he's continued in doing them, knowing that he'll be free of punishment. But here he is in these 4 walls, so 4 5-star 4 walls.
Yeah, really nice.
Because I have to say that the taxes must be very, very high in Canada, because those prisons, those sort of Amman-like prisons, are quite stumping. But I think the oxygen is fast running out for Fred, and now he's really having to really think through the scenarios. I mean, early on I'm not sure if I'm allowed to reveal this, but I'm going to, that we find out that Serena is pregnant. And so there's this sort of gift from heaven in his eyes. And I think he sees it as this huge sign, and that really turns things around for him. And spiritually, not just politically, not something that he can spin, but I think he feels like a new man, really. And I don't know if their relationship will reignite. I think they've both thrown each other under the bus, and there's no way back. There's no love lost there, but I think they'll forge together a line in the sort of Waterford's way, and forge a kind of an understanding about how to get through this. I think Fred is probably resigned to the idea that he'll probably have to go down for war crimes. But there's a way out, possibly, and we'll encounter that later on.
That sounds very exciting. So the benefit of doing television is that you do get to play a character for multiple seasons. And now that you have played Fred for 4 seasons now, do you feel like you're just slipping into entirely familiar shoes whenever you're playing him? or are you still in the process of discovering some of his complexities and intricacies?
I think that's a great question. I think when he's behind his mahogany desk and he's in Gilead and he's in his double-breasted suit and his sort of military boots, he slips back into that mode. He's out of that protection now, and so what's lovely this season is we get to see him new aspects of Fred. I think in terms of really meditating on the effects of what he's put people through, and that's new for Fred. That's a new territory. Fred, as all predators, rationalizes. Who of us does not rationalize to a degree to kind of defend our position? But Fred would do it after rape and murder and chopping pinkies off. He rationalizes. That's part of his deal. It's part of, he's a sort of great spin doctor, if you like. He's into the optics, and I feel that's what he'll do here. But he's got nowhere to hide and run. And I think what we see in Fred is a man that will try to rationalize the situation in front of the sort of June's testimony. But I think he's deeply cognizant and has to look himself in the mirror and his actions. Will it change him? I don't know, but it's certainly a new perspective for Fred this season.
Yeah, and there's so much about pre-Gilead Fred that we as the viewers know about, but don't ever really get to see. But that is certainly essential for his characterization. So could you talk a little bit about how you crafted this character and continue to craft this character? Are you someone who, for instance, keeps journals, or do you sort of just absorb and internalize whatever information is on the page in both the source material and the show's scripts?
Well, the source material is vital, and he's very thinly drawn in the book, but you get through the eyes of June, you get a pretty good picture of the regime and people like Fred. But there's one description in there, and I won't do it justice, but off the top of my head, Atwood describes Fred as this very weak limb that lives inside a military boot. So there's this sense of, the weakness of the man, the patheticness, who camouflages himself as the regime allows him to do, behind the tools that can brutalize others and brutalize the women in his life, namely his wife and June. And when their intellect outshines his, he relies on the machinery to brutalize them and put them down. So that's kind of from the book, and that's really fascinating. So I love the idea that someone so weak is in a position of power, like he is. I also felt that as I move forward, and a lot of the stuff is on the page, but a lot of the stuff is sort of in the news circulating around me. The corrosive effects of predators in very powerful positions. And so it's hard not to draw parallels, like it's hard not to draw parallels when we first opened between the conservative or extreme conservative in certain areas Trump administration. And so it's also not as hard as it was difficult not to recognize the predatory behavior of people in our society and all sorts of businesses, and how there were elements of Fred in that. And so I kind of drew on that, but I also wanted to really kind of lean into the idea, of course, on the one hand, I'm having to play the face of the regime, and that your protagonist needs an antagonist and the audience needs someone to hate. And that, well, that's great. I wanted to lean into the sense that he was human, and the horror is like if it was someone in the sort of Nazi Germany, the horror is that these are ordinary people that are put in very powerful and extraordinary circumstances. And I just didn't want to forget that he was a kind of ordinary man, Fred. And so that sense of him being cognizant of his crimes, it's more so in season 4 that there's a human there. And I find seeing the human do the things they do more scary than just the sort of cardboard cutout kind of character.
Absolutely.
So I'm drawing on all sorts of elements.
Yeah, and that's what gives the character so much nuance. Joseph, you mentioned the Trump administration. That's we always talk about the real life parallels between the show and reality. We all thought that after Trump had been defeated, that we'd be moving on to something better and those parallels would go away. But unfortunately, after January the 6th, we're all still in this PTSD about how fragile democracy is, right? And how tribal and polarized we are. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on how society now can be seen through the prism of this show, and how close we are, given that we're living in two separate worlds where one believes in truth and one believes in lies, that we're just a few steps away from potentially living in a Gilead-like society, which is quite terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of what our clairvoyant writers did in, I think, season 2, where they had a flashback of Fred and Serena before Gilead was actualized. That they were in a cinema together, and Fred, they knew it was going to happen. They knew the revolution was impending, and Fred gets an email or a WhatsApp on his phone, and it says they've stormed the Capitol. They've taken Congress, and they're now taking the White House. And this season, I was filming and just thought of that moment. And you said it. It's how fragile democracy is, and I think that's what this whole show is. You can look at the parallels of politics, but ultimately, in a broad sense, this is a cautionary tale on all of those themes. Margaret wrote the book in Berlin. Obviously, the ghosts of that time surrounded her, and she said herself, everything that's in the book is something that's been perpetrated in our time or previously, and things are obviously cyclical. History has this way of repeating itself. So it's all about not going to sleep on the fact of how fragile our democracy is. And of course, you can pull out the Trump administration, but there is hundreds of other kind of regimes and administrations around the world which you could draw parallels with. So I think, in essence, it's a giant cautionary tale on that fragility.
And do you, Joseph, think that at this point in the 4th season, Fred still believes in the world that he helped to create? And if so, why is that the case, considering that he, despite being involved in designing and establishing Gilead, has broken so many of its rules throughout the series?
Well, it's that interesting line between the sort of the crusade and the belief, and then the corrosive effects of the power that you've been given. And I think he went off the rails long ago, but we have to remind ourselves that Gilead is this place, or the world is this place, where toxic levels are so high and population is really decreasing. So with that in mind, there is, I believe, this evangelical, puritanical drive in which to sort of recalibrate the moral compass, if you like, that they blame, the sons of Jacob blame for the kind of disaster of the world. But they use scripture and bastardize the word of, scripture in order, like any theocracy, in order to kind of enact their own political needs. But I think people like Fred, who I don't think are sort of way up high on the echelons of the architecture, I don't think he's the Albert Speer of Gilead, but I think he's certainly a component. He's a cog in the machinery. But I think he has these beliefs, these very conservative beliefs. But I think, the ritual of the sort of the rape and the allowance of using people as furniture, and I think it's the effects that I don't think it's just Fred. I think it could be just the effects of people who get drunk and misguided on their crusade. And that's what's fascinating to me, the way that people veer off. I don't believe in his crusade. There are other people probably in Gilead who are much more strict, but I think pretty much everyone suffers in Gilead from that thing between the fear of the regime and the kind of the way that the power corroses your kind of morality, if you like.
Yeah. Speaking of breaking the rules, we've mentioned that Serena is now pregnant, which was a huge blindside for all of us. And I was going to go into that more, but I think it's better that we don't go there yet, given that most people haven't seen past episode 4. What I'd love to know is, there's that scene with the character played by Amanda Brugel in episode 4 where she hands him that sonogram photo, and he's and basically rebuffs him, "I'm not going to help you." And he's puzzled by that and says, "I was never cruel to you." He doesn't quite see what she's actually talking about. And I found that so fascinating, that he's so blind to what's right in front of his face. Can you speak to that briefly? Because I thought that was really fascinating.
Well, I don't think he can really compute the ultrasound in front of him. But up until he opens and sees that and has to sort of mull on that kind of miracle, I think he has always seen, and again, it goes back to this thing which I've sort of read about, which is this rationalization of events in order to kind of, it seems to me a lot of the time a perpetrator or a predator of his kind is always realigning the truths to fit their narrative. And I think when Rita comes in, the first thing, he knows he's got to go to trial. So the first thing he wants to make sure is that they're clear that he did nothing to her. And he didn't. He was always quite I think kind and nice to her. But she saw and understood the horrors of the household. I think he's aware that she knew what was going on, but and also there's the previous handmaid that took her life, which I found that in the book just haunting. The whole household is haunted by the death of the first Offred. But I think it's a way of. I think he understands that he's got to go in front of a big panel, and he's got to line it up and get people on his side as much as possible, and that would be Rita.
Yeah, and hustle as much as he possibly can. One of the pleasures of this show, and unfortunately this show, it can be a very difficult watch, particularly an episode like episode 3 with all the torture. But one of the pleasures is to watch you and Yvonne Strahovski together. Your characters are playing this cat and mouse game of who's the worst. There's so much bitterness and spite, which I find so compelling. But I'd love to know from you, just as an actor playing against someone like Yvonne, what's the best thing about working with her in the scene?
Well, the best thing, well, I just adore her, and we get on like a house on fire, and she's funny and great fun to be with. But I think what I love about Yvonne and what she's done is she's just made this character so complex. And certainly what's fascinating is a feminist piece to have a woman like Serena with all those complexities, who has a belief in the sort of puritanical crusade of the sons of Jacob, and yet as a woman, I'm sure that she feels and understands, another woman's pain in the regard of living in Gilead. So I just thought she brought forth such complexities, and she really raised the bar, and always working with her, I guess, and with Lizzie, they've really raised the bar, and it's for me that brings your game up. It's always wonderful the takes, and there's always a spin and something different, and she's constantly mining. And I think they've both thrown each other, as I said earlier, under the bus. But I think going right the way back, there was a belief. I think they really did love and support, and Fred loved her voice, and she loved the fact that Fred supported her voice. It was just that the regime took it away, and then he didn't step up. And so I think there's been many scenarios where she's just been burnt, but she's had no ability to kind of, or no recourse because of the regime being so stuck in its ways. But I love Yvonne. I think she's extraordinary and has made me a better actor. Just through working with her.
And you just mentioned your co-star Elizabeth Moss, and another special thing about this season is that she made her directorial debut with 3 episodes. Talk us through how it was collaborating with her, someone who has been in your position and someone who understands the craft of acting from head to toe practically.
She's always been an extraordinary collaborative force. As a producer early on, you know, I would be writing to her and Bruce about, you know, Fred and what we can build on and lose or add. And she was there straight away, you know, even if it's 12 o'clock at night, 1 a.m, she's writing huge reams of emails. So her collaborative spirit has been there from day one. So when she stepped up to direct, I knew that she would be prepared. Obviously, she knows the narrative inside out. She's an extraordinarily gifted actor, and she would bring all of those components. And so for actors being directed by her, or certainly for me, you know, the sense of trust, you give so much trust because you know that you're super protected by her. And she's not only amazing in all of those regards, but her directorial eye, her sense of moving the camera, the lens, the shot. You know, there's 1 or 2 later on. I mean, I think 8 is my favorite episode. But her use of the camera in a very economic way is really brave and refreshing, and you're reminded that she understands the narrative and the emotional narrative of the characters like no one else. So she doesn't need to fly around doing loads of setups and loads of angles and coverage. She zones right in what needs to be examined, and that's clear. So just extraordinary all round. I don't know how she had the energy. I was half expecting her to pick me up in the morning to take me into hair and makeup, to be head of transport and hair and makeup. It's like, there's nothing this woman can't do.
She's pretty amazing. And unfortunately, we've run out of time. But Joseph, you know, I honestly believe this is some of the best work you've ever done playing this character. And I can't wait to see how this season pans out. We really thank you for your time today, and congrats on a really compelling season 4.
Well, thank you. I think it is a stunning season, and the performances. I was just because of COVID, we were restricted to just a few people on set, and so this is the season of the 2-handers. But out of that kind of paring back of numbers, what you get is this magnification of interaction between characters, and so you get these wonderful scenes all the way through the seasons where you get all the layers over many pages and characters revealing themselves, you know, not just Fred but other characters. I think Oti and Moira and, you know, Samira and Janine, you get these wonderful moments where you explore characters like you haven't done before. So I think on that regard is one of the most exciting seasons. And it was also there's great kind of, I think at the end of the season people will be cheering, will be gone from the torture porn into a whole different territory.
Yeah, I can't wait. I really can't. Anyway, good luck this award season. I
Thank you so much.
I hope you get as much as you can.
Thank you, man.